I'm just going to get started. I'd like to introduce myself, but first I'll do the land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that the lands we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. So welcome, everyone. Today, I'm going to be speaking about supporting your child through a neurodiversity affirming lens. So first and foremost, who am I and why should you listen to me? So my name is Erin T. I'm actually a creative producer and video editor by trade. This is how I've been working for the last 20 plus years. And my journey to the 2E neurodiversity world really started with my own child. I'm a parent of a neurodiverse child, or neurodivergent child, sorry, in the TDSB. And this is me with my husband and my child together. I thought it was an important thing to show because she is the reason that I sort of started this journey. As I was trying to figure out what was going on with her and to understand her better, I started doing a deep dive, and then I ended up getting my Master's of Education in Cognitive Diversity. And from there, I've started offering support for neurodiversity and as an advocate. A couple other things about me. I love to sing. I love murder mysteries. I love to swim. I love lining up things in rainbow order. I myself am neurodivergent, and I also love to meet with my friends and talk about all things to do with brains, and connect with people and communicate and share my interests. So welcome, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk to you about supporting your child through a neurodiversity affirming lens. And I wanted to talk about how, yes, parenting is a journey filled with both rewards and challenges. And especially when you're parenting a neurodivergent child, I'm very familiar with people giving you advice that doesn't work. And it's like you have a roadmap. It's a standard roadmap. So this is why I like to use this analogy of I have this picture of a sort of, I guess this is kind of like a roundabout, but I have this analogy with a roadmap. It's like you were given a roadmap. Everybody gets the same roadmap when you have a child, but your roadmap doesn't work. Like it's because your car is different. So you're going on the roads and they're bumpy and they're difficult and it's taking a long time. And you keep getting, like say you keep getting flat tires and stuff, and keep pulling over to the side of the road and you watch all these people passing you. And so what I look at it as, for myself and for my husband and for my child, was we had to find another way. We had to find another route. And we had to also accept that maybe the map that we were given wasn't going to work. And once we stopped pushing against that and trying so hard to take and use that map, that things started to really change for us. So really, it's about creating a supportive and inclusive environment that meets your child's unique needs. So what is parenting through a neurodiversity lens? That's the real question. So parenting through a neurodiversity lens is acknowledging that neurodivergent individuals are not broken. It uses a strength-based approach. It focuses on supporting sensory and emotional needs, and it values all forms of communication and play, and it fosters connection over compliance. So I just want you to think about maybe one parenting challenge, or a challenge, sorry, that you've experienced or are currently facing in supporting your neurodivergent child. So for me, I'm going to share one. For me, it was getting my child dressed. So when she was a bit younger, she really struggled with sensory sensitivities when it came to tactile. And so there were days that we were trying to get her ready for school that she couldn't put on pants, she couldn't put on a shirt, she couldn't put on anything. So that was really, really difficult. So that was like, and I think that that's not an uncommon one that people with kids who are neurodivergent face. So let's talk a little bit about using a neurodiversity affirming lens. Like, let's talk about the basics. we want to move away from a deficit-based model. So we need to stop viewing our child, stop viewing our child differences as problems. I'm not I'll say that yes, with being neurodivergent comes challenges, but we can't always look at the differences, and we should not be viewing the differences as problems. We also need to look at what makes them unique and how those traits can be their strengths. So, for example, for myself, even as somebody who has ADHD, yes, it means that I have difficulty with time management and remembering things, but it also means that I have fantastic creative problem solving skills. I take risks. I would never have done my master's if I wasn't a risk taker. So you want to focus on the strengths and interests. So leverage what your child enjoys and excels at. Encourage activities that bring them joy and build on those natural talents, using them to help develop in fun and fulfilling skills. So, for example, if your child loves drawing, how can you get them other ways to draw more? If your child loves and is super interested in a certain cartoon character, let them do deep dives, and because it brings them so much joy. Another really important thing is to prioritize sensory and emotional regulation. Prioritize sensory and emotional regulation. Understanding that your child's sensory and emotional needs are central to their well-being is really important. Sorry, I just lost my notes. And creating a calming environment that helps them manage their feelings and sensory input, whether using tools like noise-canceling headphones and taking regular breaks. Another really important thing when we're looking at using a neurodiversity affirming lens is to respect individual communication styles. So embrace how your child naturally communicates. And this could be that, like, yes, maybe they do use mouth words, but it's possible that they also show their love in other ways. Maybe they love to give you super squeezy hugs. My kids like that. So it's like sometimes there are different ways that they communicate. They may not say certain words to you that you would like to hear, maybe sometimes, but they do share things in different ways. And then focus on understanding the methods that they do use and help them make it easier for them so that you can help them connect with people in the way that they're comfortable. The next one's really important. Value your child's authentic self. Don't push them to try and be or behave or act in ways that align with society's expectations of neurotypical behavior. I know that's really difficult because we're always, as parents, we first of all want our children to feel like they belong. And then also there's this societal pressure to be like, well, yeah, of course you've got to behave that way. So you want to encourage their individuality and celebrate their differences. I have seen with my own child that leaning into her authentic self has brought her so much more joy in life. And we are lucky in the fact that she has discovered friends at her age. She's now 12. She has discovered friends that get her for who she is and love her for who she is. And they can be themselves as well, which is a wonderful thing to see. So a real thing with neurodiversity affirming approach is you want to change the environment, not the child. And I don't mean like change everything about it, but you need to look at the environment the child is in. You don't get mad at flowers when they can't grow because the soil isn't suitable for the type of flower you're trying to grow. So if you can adapt the environment to suit their needs, even if it's small things, maybe you can adjust some routines, maybe you can create sensory friendly spaces in certain ways. Maybe you can educate others and just give people another way of looking at your child. And then also, obviously, focusing on making the world work for your child is really important. Another key point is invite family, friends, and community. So if you can bring your child and family into the conversation about about your child's needs, so your child's actually part of that conversation, but also your friends and family. I know this is not always easy because sometimes family doesn't really understand. It took my mother a very long time to really see that what was going on with my child or our child was legitimately something. It wasn't just, oh, well, she's just being very difficult. So ensure that everyone in the family understands and supports your child in a way that's affirming of neurodiversity and neurodivergence. And I think over time, it can work. I do know that it might not be the easiest route, but it is, I do encourage it. Because when you have a unified approach, it creates a really supportive home environment and it reinforces in your child that their way of being in the world is a valid way of being. And then another thing that's really important is to regularly review and adapt. So like always assess, I'm always reassessing my approach. Like kids evolve, right? Your child is not always going to be 5, and they're not always going to be 10. And what works now may not work tomorrow. So if you can stay flexible and open to adjusting your parenting strategies to better align with what's changing with your child, that's great. Doesn't mean it's super easy, but I think what has helped me personally anyway is that like that curiosity that comes with trying to understand something that's a bit of a problem. I'm not saying my child's a problem, but that's an interesting way of putting it. But I love mysteries and I love um I'm a very curious person, so I've tried to lean into that curiosity and be like, okay, well, if this is not working, what else could be working? What else could we try? And also with my child, as she ages, she's able to come into those conversations and provide more and more of her own input and thoughts. And also we've created that kind of environment where it's like, let's bring her into the conversation. So the real question is, okay, how do I parent then? Or how do I support my child through a neurodivergent lens? I've got the basics now, but so what are some ways we can do it? I've my journey started with my kid 8 years ago. So over the time I have sort of developed, and I don't like to say it's not a framework or anything, but I just sort of have 3 steps or 3 core ideas that I find I always go back to and really help with sort of the general idea of what it looks like. And the first one is shifting mindsets. So to me, this is like the most important thing, really. You need to shift, you want to shift your mindset from a deficit-based model to a neurodiversity affirming. This is key to creating a supportive and empowering environment. So the idea is we start to look at things differently, which is an odd idea. It's like, okay, so yeah, how does that work? When my child was, I think it was 5, when my husband and I changed or shifted our mindsets and started looking at things through a different way, that was actually the biggest change that changed things for her, for my child. It wasn't anything that she did. It was the fact that my husband and I stepped back and said, okay, well, what are we expecting of her? What are we looking at? Like, how are we approaching this? It's obviously not working the way we're doing it. So some key points to look at when shifting mindsets is move from fixing to accepting. So like if we can start to celebrate our child for all the great things about them, even with the challenges, that's the first step. To get curious and not frustrated. Easier said than done. I totally recognize that. But instead of labeling behaviors as defiant, we should ask what our child is trying to communicate and what need isn't being met. So for example, it's very oftentimes when we see a child have a meltdown, it's like, or sorry, a tantrum, it depends on what you would call it. We're thinking, oh, it's just because they're not getting what they want. They're just being defiant. But basically every single behavior is communication. We just have to stop and ask what need isn't being met. How can I help my child better? And then to reframe the challenges. If we can view behaviors as signals of unmet needs rather than problems to be fixed. A real key point also is to focus on strengths. Instead of dwelling on what my child can't do, I try and highlight and nurture what my child is good at. My child's never going to be an athlete. She's not particularly sporty, but she's a phenomenal drawer. She's a phenomenal writer. And so we lean into those strengths and interests and make sure she gets physical activity, but don't push her to do things that maybe she was not really that interested in and doesn't excel at. And then always progress over perfection. One of the key things I always tell people is progress isn't linear. Sometimes you'll see, you feel like your child hasn't advanced at all, and suddenly suddenly they're reading. You didn't even realize they were learning how to read, and suddenly they can read a book, right? My child like wasn't walking. Suddenly one day she stood up and started walking, and I was like, has she been thinking about it this whole time? So I'm not really sure. It's very interesting. So the best thing I would say is like when you look at, you should be comparing your child to your own child, not to other children and their peers, because especially with neurodivergent children, it's an asynchronous development. It's not, you can't really compare them to their peers. So what are some practical strategies that we can try when we're looking at shifting mindsets? Making sure that I'm on the right slide. Got a very busy screen here. So what we want to do is we want to get curious. So ask the deep why. So what does my child need right now instead of how do I stop this? So I'm thinking myself personally, I'm like, okay, it's like when your child is having like a meltdown in public, which is something that had happened to us a lot when my child was younger, is I did used to be like, oh my God, how do I make this stop? And then I stopped and I was like, okay, who is the most important person in this situation is my own child. My relationship with my child is more important than what the person next to me thinks about me. But that took a lot of work on my part to feel comfortable with doing that because it does feel really stressful when you're in that situation. But if you start to ask the deep why when your child's behaviors are not what we want them to be, is maybe how to say it, we can ask ourselves, are they connecting? Are they seeking connection? Are their sensory needs being met? Are they super dysregulated? I know with my kid, so many times it was because of dysregulation. Is she having difficulty sensing internal feelings like interoception? Like sometimes kids are super hungry and they can't actually feel it because interoception is our sense of what is going on in our body. And some of our neurodivergent kids really have a hyposensitivity to interoception. Those are the kids who like maybe don't say need to pee and suddenly they're going to pee their pants if they don't make it to the toilet in time. So if they aren't here reading the cues, like I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, maybe they're dehydrated beyond belief. And that's one of the reasons that they're having difficulty with their behavior. Also about like the uncertainty of what's happening next or what is expected. Oftentimes kids will be like, I don't know where we're going. I don't know what's happening. I'm very, very uncomfortable. That may work fine for a neurotypical kid to say, okay, we're going to be going to the zoo next, or going to the zoo today. It's going to be really, really fun. I used to have to give my kids sort of a breakdown of everything that was going to happen for the day. And if I kind of missed a step, sometimes it didn't go very well. And then also maybe the task is too hard. With asynchronous development, we have to think about, is what I'm asking my child to do right now too difficult for them? And then it may also just be difficulty in expressing their needs or their wants or their emotions. So for example, I like to use this example is like so maybe why might your kid not want to put on their shoes? So you're leaving the house, your kid doesn't want to put on their shoes. Like maybe what are the reasons they might not want to do that? So it could be sensory sensitivities. Like I don't want to get my shoes on because my feet hurt. They hurt my feet when I have them on. I can feel like all of the little corners of the shoe. Or it could be executive functioning challenges. I don't want to get my shoes on because I don't know which step of the routine is first. I don't know how to put them on. I don't know each step that happens. Maybe there's a social communication difference. I didn't understand I needed to get my shoes on. Like maybe the way I asked my child to do it was not clear to the way she communicates. There's also the survival drive for autonomy. I don't want to get my shoes on because you told me to. And that's a very definite and a very real profile for some neurodivergent kids. Or anxiety. Putting on my shoes means I have to go to school and I don't want to do that. So there's lots of different reasons why that child might not want to put on their shoes, right? And for us as parents, we sort of have to start asking, well, what could it be? And we're not always going to get it right, but at least if we're curious, we might be able to figure it out. And it takes time. So practice self-awareness. Reflect on your own reactions and beliefs about your child's behaviors. Are they driven by society pressures or your child's needs? So what I mean by that is when you're feeling like, and I'm going to say this, when I'm embarrassed in public because my child's having a meltdown, is it because I'm embarrassed of my child, really? Or is it because I'm worried about what society's thinking of me as a parent? Because obviously I'm not a good parent because nobody who's a good parent's child ever falls apart in public, which we know is absolutely not true. But when you talk about shifting mindsets, it's really about doing the work for us as parents, as opposed to any kind of outward thing that we're doing directly with the child. By shifting our mindsets and hopefully educating others so that they shift theirs. And I know that that's a whole other ball of wax that we can't really necessarily do all at once, but you just need to start looking at yourself and asking yourself, like, why does it matter to me when things like this happen? So what I've started doing is like, I'm considering my own values and what's important. What's important for me is that my child is happy and healthy and is moving through the world in a way that they feel good about themselves. I don't want my kid to feel like she needs to apologize for who she is. And I do challenge society's norms sometimes when I think, well, why do I care about that? Do I care that she doesn't, she's not participating in, I don't know, a soccer team, but that everybody else at school is participating in, right? So I want you to just reflect for yourself. What is one thing you do or worry about because of how others might perceive it? So I always talk to people about, like, do you worry about that because, like, it's something that you don't think is good for your family? Or do you worry about that because you're worried about what somebody would say if they saw you doing it, or if your mother saw you doing it? Like, if you eat TV, sometimes we would eat dinner in front of the television because it works better for our family. And I never did that as a kid with with my parents and my brother. And so sometimes I'm like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, but it's a way for us to connect. Sometimes at the end of the day, when we're really overstimulated and tired, we can eat and we can talk and we can watch TV, but we don't have to there's no pressure to be like all eating perfectly and stuff like that. Like, I don't focus on how my child is sitting and how she's eating. So take a few minutes to think about that, and then we can go on to the next idea. And if anybody wants to share, I think you can speak out, or if you want to chat. That's the only thing I'm not 100% sure about with this is um, if you want to share in the chat, or you'd prefer to unmute yourself and share, that's also completely fine. And I know some people came in a bit later, so you've been getting parts of what we've been talking about. But the first thing we're really talking about is shifting mindsets as a core idea through parenting through or supporting your child through a neurodiversity affirming lens.
Sure, I'd like to ask a question.
Oh,
If the
absolutely.
mic works, yes.
Yeah, it does. It does. That's great.
You mentioned earlier about, something about family, I guess, like working with other family members, to
Yeah.
understand. So, just any tips you may have come across, like especially when it's working with extended family members, where some of them may have grown up as neurodiverse and stuff, but never had a name and
Yeah.
may have some self-hate or whatever it is. So trying to explain my kids' behavior can sometimes
Yeah.
be tough.
Triggering. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like how do you balance trying to create a safe space around those individuals, while at the same time being setting those very clear boundaries in conversations of how they might describe a behavior.
That's a really good one, and that's super loaded. I think a lot
Yeah.
of it has to do with like I always try and be empathetic and try and see things from the other person's perspective. But I also, and I don't know, maybe this is not well explained or maybe not. I always put my child's needs ahead of anyone else's. So I always try and remember, I'm like, okay, so I can set boundaries for my own child, and hopefully when I'm speaking about their behaviors or how they're acting, if you have some explanation for it, and I'm not sure where you are in your journey, but like once I was able to express to, say, like my parents, this is what's actually happening to her when this is happening. So I
Mm,
would give like analogies of, I don't know if this would be helpful, but for me, what worked really well was like the fight or flight. If you can start to get people to understand that with your child's fight or flight response, and it's not even just fight or flight, but their nervous system
yeah.
response is like, it's like a bear's attacking them when they're hearing like a siren go by, right? Like, so
Hmm.
if we can try and create like sort of a something that bothers the person that you're talking to, if they can relate to that, I'm not sure if that's super helpful, but I do
Yeah,
find
no,
that
it is.
bear analogy, and maybe try and remove, if you can, like the fact that, okay, they probably actually understand this better than they think they do, because they are
Hmm.
neurodivergent themselves but are not aware of it, or if you have an ableist
Hmm.
view of themselves.
Hmm.
But if you can try and sort of like, it's like, here's the general way to let everybody understand, even neurotypicals. If you saw
Yeah.
bear in the woods, you would not be worrying about how you're behaving. You would not be worrying about
Hmm.
yelling and screaming because you're trying to get away from the bear, or if you were getting attacked in the street, for example, right? So I'm not sure if that would be helpful, but I do try and like,
That's very, I thanks so much for summing up that way, especially for, yes, my priority is my children
yeah,
first in that. So, and like
yeah.
making that a more relatable thing. I really appreciate you saying that.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad I could be of help. It's kind of weird to be in here because it's like I'm like, okay, people are coming in and I'm still talking,
Yeah.
and then I worry about people like, I was like, oh, they missed this part. But
Yeah.
um, so if it's okay if nobody wants to share, I just wanted to get it's more to get you thinking because I'm like I said before, I'm like a curious person. So I like to look at it as sort of like a mystery and be like, okay, how can we tease this apart and look for the answers? So this was more like a prompt to also make you just start to think about your own experience. So there's no need to really share it. It's just more a question to get people thinking. And also, I guess I have to keep an eye on time. That's not my best. That's not my best skill is time management. So I got to keep keep an eye on the time. So I was just going to move on to refining expectations, unless anybody had any other pressing questions. However, I will try and have time at the end to have a Q&A. So hopefully that works out because we still have, I think we have 15 minutes. So I will move on. So the other thing, so that I talked about three core ideas. The first one was shifting mindsets. The next one is redefining expectations. And this one I think is really important to talk about is too, because when we set unrealistic expectations, it can be frustrating for both the parents and the child or the children. And when we're flexible and we nurture expectations, like we can foster a healthy connection. So it's good to stop and say, what expectations are realistic? We need to adjust our expectations to fit our child's abilities and needs that are right now. We don't want to not push our child, but we have to push our child with support, right? It's like the scaffolding or the idea of like, I do it for them, I do it with them, they do it themselves. And most neurodivergent children, sorry, may need more time with, I do it for them. I mean, they may need more time with, I do it with them before they can do it on their own. So it's like even something like, you know, getting out of diapers. Sometimes kids are in diapers longer that are neurodivergent, right? Um, the other thing is adaptability. The one thing that's really helped me is this idea of recognizing fluctuating capacity, which is this idea of like some days your kids are going to do things and be so like quote unquote neurotypical that people don't believe that they need special accommodations or that they have a different brain type or a different neurotype. And other days it's like their tank is completely empty, and that's fluctuating capacity. I have times with my own child where she comes home from school and I can tell that she's like not she's had a long day, maybe it's been really noisy, maybe there's been extra things that have been difficult for her, and so she's used up more energy than normal. And so I'll say, "Oh, I'll empty out your backpack and take out your lunch bag and clean it out because that's a chore that she does, or that's a responsibility she has for herself, and she's been working towards doing that. We've been working towards that for like we were working towards that for like 6 months when she was about 10. It took us 6 months before she would do it without needing to be prompted. So, but I now offer it sometimes because it's like some days it's just harder for her to do all the things. And so by recognizing or adapting to fluctuating capacity, you're not going to be like, well, if I do it for them one day, I'm going to have to do it for them every day. The idea is that your child will also, this is what happened to my kid anyway recently, and I was really amazed to see it. She said, can you help me with my bag today? I have to get my homework started, and I just want to make sure I get it started on time, and I'm findable. And so she was able to actually ask for help when she needed it. And I'm not used to her doing that. So that's good. And also focus on your child's personal growth and well-being. So rather than comparing them to their neurotypical peers, especially, as I said earlier, like with neurodivergent kids, it's asynchronous development. So you're going to see sometimes they're like excelling in something, like they know absolutely everything about like mushrooms, for example. I know a kid like that, but they have difficulty tying their shoes and they're 12, right? So we have to compare them to themselves at that time and then be like, well, like my own child, 6 months ago, she would never have asked me for help with this situation. She'd never be able to recognize that she was having a hard day because her tank was low. But now she can. So now she can ask for help. So some practical strategies I suggest is, flexible and predictable routines, which I know sounds funny because they're predictable, but they're also flexible. We leave a lot of time for downtime in our house, and that has been probably the single most important thing we've done. And I know it's hard to do when kids have like a lot of activities and stuff, but that's another suggestion I have that worked for us is looking at your extracurriculars if you have them, or other types of responsibilities that your child has or that you have as a parent, and what can be maybe changed or removed if it's necessary. Maybe your kid needs a bit more downtime than the average kid. Some kids go to extracurricular activities every day after school and are fine, and other kids cannot do it. And I think the really important thing is to focus on growth and not conformity. What you want is your child, okay, this is what I want, and I believe most parents want this. You want your child to be growing and happy, right? You don't want them to be conforming to society and not actually themselves. Because I think that's the issue with by parenting or supporting your child through a neurodiversity lens. The idea is that you're supporting your child in being themselves. I know so many adults, neurodivergent adults, who are still masking so heavily that they don't even realize that they're not being themselves. And that is, if we can help our kids from the beginning to not feel that they have to do that. And I recognize that there are times when masking is important. It's just like code switching, like you do. But in general, you want your child to be themselves, just like any parent, I think, wants their child to be themselves and feel like they can be themselves. So I'm just trying to make sure I get through this. There's always lots to talk about. So for this idea of redefining expectations, can you think of a time when you had to adjust your expectations for your child? Or if you can't think of one of those, is there an expectation you have that you think maybe I should be looking at adjusting it? So I would say maybe like 2 minutes, because I think I only have about 10 more minutes after that to finish chatting, because I think I have 45 minutes. So I just have one more step. So I think that's going to be helpful that we can get through it all. So maybe I'll say 1 minute. So what I'll say is I will leave you with that prompt since we're trying to get through everything. And I'll move on to building the next idea, which is building deeper connections. Now, this one I really love to lean into because this is what I think has really, really helped my own relationship with my child, is strengthening the bond between myself and her to foster trust, empathy, and better communication. So I spend a lot of time trying to get to know my kid better. The idea is prioritizing emotional safety. So when your child feels safe and connected and understood, they're more likely to be able to express themselves. If they can express their feelings too, like they may tell you more about what's going on at school, and that so that you as a parent can better support them in the school situation. Because sometimes we just don't know what is going on at school, which is one of the other things, right? Is that, your kid could be like, fine, fine, fine. And then you find out, that they're super far behind in math because they don't know what's going on and they refuse to ask for help because they're too shy. And that's happened to somebody else I know, who they just didn't know until they went to the parent-teacher meeting. So if we can create an environment where our child's emotions are acknowledged, even during tough times, and I think that's another thing, validating when a child is really upset, it's like they have a right to be upset. It's sometimes how they express that upset that they need to maybe work on, or you need to support them to work on. So like, we don't want kids hitting and stuff like that, but the feelings are valid. It's how they express them that can sometimes be problematic. And so I think we're quick to say, oh, get over it or stop behaving that way. And we're not thinking about, well, the key to that though is that they're very upset about something. So if they're able to express their emotions and talk about them more, perhaps that we can move towards, or even just when you can, it's that connection. Maybe even it's just with my own child when she was younger, it was like she was so mad she was so mad. She did not want to have anything to do with me. And I used to be like, fine. And I'd leave the room. And then what I started to do was like, I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to be here. And I would say, well, do you need a hug? And then she'd be really mad at me. No, I don't want one. And I'd just wait. And then I'd ask her again and again. And that for me as a parent is even hard, because when your kid's upset and getting, and is angry or crying or throwing a tantrum, it might be triggering for you as a parent, especially if you're neurodivergent, because maybe the screaming is just really hard for you with your ears, right? But I did find that sitting down and just waiting and giving it sort of her the power to decide. And then she eventually did start to ask for help or come to get a hug. And then she would see, oh, this does help me. But it took a really long time because she was like, she's still to this day, like, well, when I get upset about something and then I realize I've overreacted, I get upset with myself. So I want to stay angry, because if not, why did I get angry to begin with? And I was like, that rationale does not make any sense. But we're never in our thinking brain when we're that upset. And that's, I think, the other thing to remember when your kid is in that state, like, if your nervous system regulation is on like survival mode, you are not learning anything. And so parenting, or trying to work on behaviors during that time is not the right time to do it. It's like, supporting and helping the child to de de-escalate, and then later we can discuss like how could we have done that differently? How can I support you next time? And the idea that also like all forms of connection are valid. Like it's okay if you connect with your child through video games. Some people connect really well with their child through video games. It's okay if you connect through all different kinds of ways. I think that we're very sort of programmed to be like there's only certain ways that parents and children interact, and these are the valid or the normal ways of doing it. And then the idea of also connection over compliance. You want to build a relationship with your child and build that trust. You don't just want them to do what you say. I mean, I know it's nicer when they just do what you say. I absolutely love it when my kid does not question me on what I'm asking her to do. But I do, especially with neurodivergent kids, the connection, that feeling of safe space will mean that at home, their space is a regulated space, a space where they can be themselves. So they're better equipped to go out in the world and face it when they don't have all the tools that they want to use at the time. So I do have more for this section. It's just the time has like run out with all of this, but I did want to say a quick actually I do want to show these because I get excited about these. There's lots of different ways to connect with your child. And I always suggest some of these things, like we were just saying, video games. Some parents I know play Minecraft with their kids. You also don't have to play Minecraft with your kids. You could also just talk to your kids about Minecraft if they're super into it. There's some other things that kids like, the TV shows that kids are really into right now, like Bluey, which honestly is a really great show. My kid loves it and she's 12. But Bluey or like Owl House, Gravity Falls, these are all examples of television shows that a lot of kids I know that were neurodivergent get into. Owl House and Gravity Falls are more for the older kids between like 8 and 12, I guess. But Bluey's all across. Like you've got kids who are, 2 watching it, and you've got kids who are 15 watching it. So, and they have lots of great stories in there. And so I think about like, sometimes there might be talking points that come out up in there if you watch it together. So my husband and Ari and I watch a lot of, my husband and my child and I watch a lot of television series and movies together as a way of connecting, and sharing general common interests. And another one is, I'm just saying, yeah, films, if you can. I know that this one is Inside Out too, which is also a great film. I'm not saying you specifically have to watch this one, but this is a great one that's also sort of is fun to watch, but it also starts you talking about emotions and the idea of that, emotions sometimes feel like they're operating on their own. They're not actually, we don't have control of them. So I say, like, for me, the main thing is I connect with my child through lots of different ways. We listen to musical theater, we go do shopping, we go for walks, we go for bubble tea because she's 12, so bubble tea is the thing. But if you can think of an activity or moment when you felt truly connected with your child, um, that would be something that you could think about. And then my takeaway from this today is, can you think of one practical step you could maybe try with your own kid, or your own children after today? And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them now. We only have a couple more minutes. I apologize. I did get started a tiny bit late because there wasn't anybody in here, and I was like, oh, I better just get started. I wasn't really sure how long it took people to come in. I think the last session maybe went over a bit, some of the last sessions. But this is the way you can reach out to me if you'd like. This is my website, this is my email. I'm on Instagram. And then if you scan the QR code, you can, there's a page where you can sign up for my newsletter, or you can find out about the other ways you can connect with me or find out more about me. So does anybody have any questions in the last couple minutes that we have? Does anybody want to share anything? If not, that's totally fine. I just appreciate people showing up and listening today. I'm actually in Hawaii. I was just at a conference yesterday, so I'm up really early to do this. I'm not sure if you can hear the frogs in the background, but so it's completely different time zone for me. But I appreciate you all coming out to listen to what I had to say today.
I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation. It really hits home. It's always, I think, good for a parent of a neurodiverse child to hear these things and be reminded, and to also hear that other people have similar experiences in their parenting journey, because I think sometimes it can feel lonely.
Yes. Absolutely. And
You know, you're talking to your other parent friends with neurotypical kids, and
mhm.
they all nod in agreement when you're describing what's happening, but you know really that they don't quite know the extent
Yeah.
to what you are experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of the foundation behind like what I'm trying to offer when I'm coming out and speaking and sharing with people, is that like I did so much work on my own. I'm hoping that some of the stuff and some of the knowledge I've collected over the last 8 years, if I could share it, and I can just ease the load or ease the burden of the people coming up behind me. Like, because it is lonely. It can be very lonely. And I've been very lucky to meet people whose children are very similar. And I mean, they're similar, but they're also not similar, of course, right? Because no neurodivergent kid is exactly the same, but just to know you're not alone is a key thing. I think to know that you're not the only person. Your child is not broken. And this is what I think is my big thing, is that people sometimes feel like it's their fault. And as a parent, it's not. You're doing your best. And when we know better as parents, we do better. And so we can always be learning and always be there. But I think when you put your child first too, which it seems like, oh, of course I always do, but it's like when you sit back and say, okay, what's best for me, what's best for my child. So thank you for that. Thanks for sharing, because that's really why I do this. So I hope that I'll get a chance to do it some more with the TDSB, since this is my school board. So yeah, so thank you everyone for coming. And I guess unless there's other questions, I will say goodbye, because that's 45 minutes. And I guess there's other sessions starting up soon that people need to get to. Thank you.